Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Not Even French channel. Today we are talking about the things French people suck at. I know I'm gonna get so much hate for this video, but I wanted to make a video on just, from my very biased perspective, social observer, the things that I've seen time and time again most people struggle with or just be quite bad at in general. I think it's an interesting angle from which to observe the culture, and you guys know that that is what I'm all about. Now, I know the number one thing on this list that most people might be expecting is speaking English or level of English, and I just want to say up front, I'm not going to be covering that.
Nope.
Because until us native English speakers and Anglophones can speak fluent French, I don't think we have anything to say on that matter. So that's not going to be on the list. However, I am going to be talking about 9 things that French people genuinely suck at. Now, just before jumping in, this episode of Not Even French is brought to you by one of my favorite apps, Blinkist. If you watch the Not Even French channel, you will know that I love this app because I am obsessed with learning, growth, self-development, all that good stuff. And what Blinkist does amazingly is they take thousands and thousands and thousands of non-fiction book titles and they transform them into blinks. Blinks are bite-sized key learnings that you can read or listen to in 15 minutes. So basically they cut the fluff, you get the key learnings of the book that you're reading in 15 minutes or so. And there are topics from, health and wellness, finance, career, relationships and love, mental health, language, social media. I mean, anything self-development, you will find it there, plus all of the latest bestseller book titles in the non-fiction category. You'll find them on the app as well. It's really, really cool. So I like to listen to my blinks either while I'm cooking or going for a walk. A couple that I've enjoyed recently have been Badass Habits by Jen Sincero. I've realized that I'm super goal driven. I love to set big goals, but what kind of holds me back from sometimes achieving my goals is the habits and the rituals that I put in place to make the goal become a reality. So I've been really loving that one, and also been reading Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's a cult classic in the finance space. So if you want to try Blinkist too, and I'm pretty sure you do, click the link in the description box down below, because the first 100 people who click on it who are watching this video are going to get a 7-day free trial of the premium membership. And if you decide to continue, you can cancel at any time, but if you decide to continue, you'll get 25% off your membership with Blinkist as well. So enjoy, and without further ado, let's jump into the things that French people are relatively bad at. Okay, so the first point is around giving positive feedback. So we all know that the French like to critique. They're known for passionately criticizing things and very sparingly offering up positive feedback.
Oui.
Whereas in American and more Anglo-Saxon cultures for sure, we tend to give like 3 pieces of positive feedback for every 1 piece of negative, right? The feedback sandwich and all that kind of stuff. We very much want to make people feel positively reinforced rather than negatively reinforced. And it's not quite the case in France. And what I found, like working in corporate for big French giants, in English speaking environments and international environments, there were a lot of international colleagues, and the French managers and directors really had a hard time at giving positive feedback, A, at all, and B, without saying but. And so, for example, one of my directors said to me, if I'm not giving you feedback, you're doing a good job, right? Like, you're doing an amazing job, Rosie, because I never give you feedback. And I'm like, but that's the problem. I don't know how I'm doing because I'm not getting feedback. So for them, it's sort of like, if you hear nothing, it's good news, that's positive feedback. And if you're doing something not okay or making mistakes, whatever, you'll absolutely hear about it. And I think this French critical eye and being harshly judged does stem from the education system. It is very much built around negative reinforcement. It's very much built around, where you're doing the dictée and you start at 20 out of 20, and then for every mistake you make, you get a point off until it gets into the negatives if need be. There's just definitely more of a culture around motivation not by fear as such, but yeah, by negative reinforcement, let's say. It's also really valued in the French culture to be able to provide a critique. If you're not criticizing things, you could be seen as someone who's lacking in opinion or critical thought, but it's just about what's valued in a different culture. But in general, you're not going to be finding French people really able to calmly and confidently say, wow, you did such an incredible job, there's nothing I would change, keep doing you're absolutely killing it. Like, it's just not the vibe. My second point may be a little bit of an outrageous claim, but hear me out. I feel like French people aren't great at trusting by default. I feel like they have very little trust in strangers, in the system, in a lot of things really.
Well, I don't like anybody I don't know.
So a couple of examples with Neil's in mind is, you know, the other day we were driving along a road and we saw a stand on the side of the road selling horse poo, and we grabbed some for our garden, and it was an honesty box system. So you just put your $2 in and you take your poo. And you see that all the time in New Zealand for fruit, berries, you know, veggies, stuff like that, these honesty box systems. And Niels couldn't really believe that existed. He was like, wow, I feel like I've gone back to the 60s, you know, like when everything was, you know, safe and well, and people trusted people and that kind of thing. And of course, if you're a long-time watcher of this channel, you may remember my story when I arrived in France and I would smile and say bonjour to people that I would sit next to on the metro, and I had a lady literally clutch her handbag. I was like, bonjour, and she like literally took her handbag and turned away from me. She was like, oh, who is this person who wants to steal from me? There is just a bit of a theme of not wanting to trust someone by default, because you could get screwed in France as well. Like, trusting quickly is naive as well. For example, when you move into a new apartment, you have to do the inventory and you have to list off, you know, all the chattels, all the, you know, marks on the walls, or the stains on the floors, like whatever it is. I remember Niels taking this really seriously, like observing for any little dot on the wall. In New Zealand, it's a bit more general. We do that, but sort of like, you know, walls in average condition, like, you know, we'll only sort of note down something extreme, but I remember him taking that really, really seriously. And it's true that there's this fear that if they don't have everything ticked off and really accurately detailed, the landlord might see an opportunity to screw them over somehow, to take some extra money, to be like, oh, that mark, you know, wasn't there before, I'm gonna charge you for painting or whatever it is. And that's what French landlords have kind of made a tradition of doing, and so it makes people scared to trust them by default. You also, you know, walking around Paris, it's just normal in the streets to see, you know, walking up to Montmartre, you see people being scammed, people, you know, playing those street games, people, you know, fake Greenpeace people getting you to sign fake petitions and stuff like that. So yeah, you do have to have your wits about you, and you have to be aware that people might try and scam you, I guess, in this life. So it is worth paying attention to. There is just a feeling though in France that you need to be on your guard. If you're meeting a stranger for the first time and they're super friendly, it's a little bit like, what do they want? Why are they so friendly? It's really, really hard to put into words. I'm sure any expats watching my channel right now who are living in France know exactly what I mean. I would love to hear your examples and stories down below, because you'll probably illustrate this point far better than I can. The next thing that French people suck at is admitting fault. Admitting that they're wrong, admitting a mistake. With French people, I feel like if something goes wrong, it's always someone else to blame, it's the system to blame, it's like there's always some kind of blame to attribute to someone else other than the self, you know? It's like this lack of radical accountability, being like, oh yeah, my bad, that was a really bad thing to do. Full stop. No sorry but, no, you know, no excuses, just be like, oh, I fucked up, you know? And this can show up in a lot of ways, right? It can show up in the personal realm, like I was talking to a friend about this, like if you're living with a French person and they accidentally, you know, kick a glass over that was on the floor, or knock a glass off an edge of a table or something, they'll be like, what was it doing on the edge of the table? You shouldn't have had that glass on the floor. Like it's never like, what was that doing there? That created the conditions for which I made a mistake, kind of thing. It can show up in stores and customer service. For example, La Poste, one of the things that they love to say is,
c'est pas mon job, hein? C'est pas moi qui prends les décisions, hein? C'est pas moi.
You know, it's very much like, it's not me, it's not my fault, like it's someone else, you know?
C'est pas moi qui fais les règles, madame.
I also find that in a heated debate with a French person, they will keep arguing and arguing and debating until they are blue in the face. Even if they change their mind mid-debate or something like that, they'll just keep going to drive their point home, to the point where at the end they'll be like, oh, I agree with you, but I was just playing devil's advocate, but they have to argue to really drive home their point of view, let's say. I also find there's certain things about the French culture where they would never admit that it could be better to do it differently or could be done another way, like they're right, the way they do it is right. And I'm thinking about some things particularly around food, right? So in the morning in France for breakfast, you usually have a very sweet breakfast, right? It can be a tartine, so like some jam and butter on a baguette, for example. But yeah, there's usually like a hot chocolate, tartine, like there's a lot of sugar, I find, in general, in a French person's breakfast. And from my perspective, if you ask any nutritionist out there what you should eat in the morning, what would be the ideal thing to eat in the morning, it's more like protein, right? It's more like bacon and eggs would be really good, or some, you know, an egg and avocado on toast and that kind of stuff, and actually to avoid sugar in the morning. But because that's the way it's done in France, like, good luck convincing anyone, like having this conversation basically, that if you try to offer a new perspective on how you should eat, or like, for example, if you bring them evidence about, you know, the benefits of doing OMAD, 1 meal a day. You know, I don't do that, but there's loads of research out there showing that it's actually a really good way to eat, because humans don't need their insulin being spiked after every single meal and stuff like that, and it's against their, you know, what's always been done. I feel like there's not much open-mindedness about like new concepts and new ways when things are very dear to the French way of life, and they will argue and argue until the cows come home that their way is the right way. Now, I don't know where this comes from. If you're French watching this, I would love to hear about it. Maybe, you know, in the education system, I have an assumption that you're probably sort of, you know, punished for admitting mistake or admitting fault, you know, because of that negative reinforcement, and so you don't want to be wrong and you don't want to admit fault. Maybe taking the blame and admitting mistakes isn't something sort of like as noble as it is in Anglo-Saxon cultures. I don't know. I would love to hear your perspective down below. The next thing that French people royally suck at is simplifying processes. Oh my gosh. Okay, I mean, I'm not even gonna bore you with some of my stories about French administration, but I'm gonna give you a couple of examples where I find this to be true. The first is with websites, French websites. Oh my gosh, I've never navigated such clunky, unuser-friendly websites. Like, it's weird, like they're UI designers, so the people in charge of the user interface, like the websites might look beautiful, but when you get into it, when you have to fill out forms and actually complete a process, it's just hard. And I'm going to show you a screenshot of this. I was working with a client recently to help them get into top tier master's programs in France. And look at this website. Like, this is 2021, people. Like, are you serious? And, you know, you have these complicated forms. It won't accept your inputs. It's like, you put in your social security number and it says it has to be 11 characters and it's 12, and it's just, it won't work. And then you got to the payment processor part and it wouldn't accept credit cards. But I was just laughing because of course it didn't work. Of course it didn't work. Like, French websites suck, especially anything in the public domain, whether that's, you know, signing up for French courses with the, you know, the town hall or universities or, you know, La Poste or whatever it is. But oh my gosh, they're so unfriendly to use and so clunky. You really do feel like you've gone back in time for 10 years. Another minuscule example is whenever you sign an official document in France where you have to provide your signature for something, for example, signing up to a contract or whatever that looks like, you have to also write lu est approuvé, read and approved, beside your signature. So just an additional step in the process. But why? I mean, as far as I know, lu and approuvé doesn't mean anything more than bonjour. Like, I'm pretty sure the only thing of legal significance is the signature itself. So why add an additional step to the process? Everything just has to be like one step too hard in France. The next thing that French people suck at is offering up information. I feel like there's quite a big culture of secrecy in France. I feel like people keep information really closely guarded, and it is, you know, hard to get to know people. I remember working with my manager for 4 months in my first role in France, and I was like, I wonder if, you know, she has a family, is she married, does she have kids, like, where does she live, like, just, you know, just things, that just interesting things about a person. And they really have to melt down before offering up this kind of information. Anything personal. It does take a while to crack that coconut. We talked about, you know, peaches versus coconuts before on this channel. But another way that this shows up as well is the names on Facebook and Instagram. Like, try and find a French person who you've met by name. It's impossible because they all use these fake pseudonyms and names, and they make, you know, puns out of their last name, and they don't use their proper first name and stuff. Like, you'll see a lot of French people, and good for them caring about their privacy, but it's, yeah, there's this whole culture of secrecy and, you know, resistant to offering up information and that kind of stuff, which actually can make it sort of harder to connect and get to know people as well. Of course, I couldn't do this video without mentioning that French people suck at not complaining, like just being satisfied with something. You cannot say something in France like, oh, it was good, without saying like mais or par contre. You always have to add your critique. And yeah, they suck at just sitting in the optimism, sitting in the positivity. I think if a positive sentence or remark isn't followed by some kind of improvement to be made, their head might explode. A little bit more serious, I don't think the French are very good at dealing with mental health issues. In France, mental health care is delivered separately from the rest of healthcare in an entirely parallel system. This means that not only is the system very opaque, but there are very long wait lists when it comes to specialized care, and psychologists are not covered by the mandatory national health insurance, the assurance maladie. So that means that there's financial barriers for people as well. And in general, I do find that there is more of a stigma around mental health in France. I feel like it's something that a lot of doctors solve very quickly with pills and antidepressants, and that's kind of like a default. And it seems much, much less developed in terms of the holistic mental health care and support. And you know, for all the brilliance of the French healthcare system, I do feel like counseling, psychiatry, like that kind of stuff should be more accessible and it should be free. The next thing that French people suck at, and probably just because it's not really in the culture, is hacking credit cards, because it's not really normal or usual to have a credit card in France. They're not really onto this kind of system. Whereas we know in the Anglo-Saxon world, in our culture, we tend to use credit cards not just to go into debt, but to actually accumulate bonuses, to accumulate points, to accumulate all sorts of rewards. So if you're in the financial position where you can spend up on your credit card and then just use whatever in your current account to pay off that credit card at the end of every month, you can spend and buy a lot of things without being charged interest. But by using that credit card, you accumulate points. So there's all sorts of different systems, all kind of rewards that you can unlock. But I mean, something that I really love in New Zealand is I accumulate air points. So a lot of my national air travel with Air New Zealand is free because I'm spending money on my credit card every month. I'm accumulating my points and I can exchange them for free flights. And that's just something that you don't really see being done in France because they don't have that put it on credit and then pay it off later without interest mentality. The final thing that I don't think French people are really good at is celebrating that rags to riches story. You know, I feel like in the Anglo-Saxon cultures, there's this real, I don't know, it's everything is possible, doesn't matter where you start, you can make it, like that self-made man, that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, that kind of thing, that rags to riches. So we celebrate someone who was poor and then became wealthy. Whereas in French, of course, they have a word for this, which is nouveau riche, you know, newly rich. And it's sort of like, even if you made it, even if you're wealthy, you know, you can't buy refinement, you can't buy culture, that kind of thing. And I do feel like social mobility, for whatever reason, is harder somehow in France. And even if you do work your way up and make a lot of money, you of course don't talk about it because you don't really talk about wealth and money in France, particularly from those Catholic roots in the culture. It's not really, you know, well seen to be open about money. So of course, all of this comes together where the rags to riches stories aren't really as celebrated or sort of, put on a pedestal to inspire, motivate, and encourage people to, you know, change their situation and make it, even if you're an underdog, that kind of thing. Cool guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it. Let me know if you can think of anything else that French people suck at in the comments below, but remember to be kind, or please counterbalance my arguments with the things that French people are amazing at. I'm actually going to be making a video on that really, really soon. Otherwise, I hope that you guys are safe and well wherever you are, and I'll see you soon on the Not Even French channel. À bientôt!